Hello, this video is about the life and work of the great Bashkurt scholar Zeki Velidi Togan. He had a major impact on Russian Oriental studies and also Oriental studies further abroad in Europe and even the United States. He did teach the Princeton scholar Martin Dixon and was a colleague of the Russian Orientalist Vasily Bartold. I think he's fairly well known in Turkey and kind of the wider Turkic world, but I'd like to make a video to share about his interesting life and his impact. In this video, I'm mostly going to focus on his academic career, although he was very dedicated to the cause of a independence for Russian Turkestan and kind of pan-Turkic ideology. I don't want to minimize that, but some of those issues can get quite complicated for a video like this, and so mostly I'm just going to be giving an overview. I may revisit his political career in the future, but we will touch on that here today. So Togan was born in December of 1890 in Bashkortostan, which you can see there on the map, is in southern Russia, north of the border of Kazakhstan, and according to today's borders. Of course, when he was born in 1890, this was still the Russian Empire, and this was part of Russian Turkestan. He was mainly taught by his parents. Both of his parents were literate and also studied at the village madrasa. And that of his maternal uncle in another town called Utek, a few miles from where he grew up. But by the age of 18, Togan knew not only his native language, Bashkurt, but also Chagatai, Persian, Arabic, and Russian. He traveled around with his father and became acquainted with the wider region. The break in his academic career was in the summer of 1908. He left home and wanted to get an education, so he went to Kazan, where he met a number of Orientalists and attended courses at the Kazan University and the Kasimiya Madrasa. After a few years, by 1911, he was able to publish his first book, Turk and Tatar History, Turk ve Tatar Tori, and that was to be a textbook for the course he began to teach at the Kasimiya Madrasa. In the summer months, he did research, as many scholars do, especially in Orenburg and Astrakhan, still important sites for archival research, especially the Orenburg archives for this region. And this is where he also began to study some European languages. His goal was to sit for some exams that would allow him to teach at Russian institutes of higher education. And he was well positioned for this because his book, Turk and Tatar History, was well liked, and he was elected to the Historical and Archaeological Society at Kazan University. And he also received some invitations to become an instructor at a madrasa. In 1913, he was given a project by Kazan University to collect documentation about the history, language, and literature of the Fergana Valley. And it was during this research trip he was invited to join the Russian colonial administration in Tashkent, but he declined to do so. By 1914, thanks to, in part, the recommendation of the Russian scholar Vasily Bartold, whom I mentioned earlier, someone I would hope to cover on this channel, he was given another project under the sponsorship of the Russian Academy of Sciences to conduct research on the Bukharan Khanate. And after returning from this trip in Bukhara, he began to publish in various journals. Bartold wanted to give Togan an appointment to the School of Oriental Languages. This was patronized by the Tsarina, and Togan went to Kazan, where he had to sit for certain qualifying exams to teach at what was referred to as the quote non-Russian seminaries. And he did pass the test. However, this was not to be because he did not have a formal appointment. And part of this was because of Bartold's opposition to the First World War, which was by then had started by then. Bartold had lost several students, apparently, and during the first months of the Great War, he was inducted into the army, but he was only there for a little over 2 weeks, as there was a law passed that exempted teachers from these non-Russian schools from military service. And he returned to Ufa. By 1915, he was elected to serve the Duma. And while he was in St. Petersburg, he continued his scholarly work and helped Bartold with preparing one of his seminal works, Ulugh Bey, which you can find on the Internet Archive if you look up Bartold's Studies of Central Asia. It's quite good reading. Now, he continued working on various academic projects, such as worked on corrections of Bartold's one of Bartold's other works. He helped with the Imperial Geographic Society and Asiatic Museum, and continued to publish. But this was when, obviously, getting into 1917, when the revolutionary movement in Russia kind of reached a fever pitch, and he started to devote himself to independence for Turkestan. Now, this part can get quite complex, so I'm just going to summarize it briefly. Complex not only because of the movements within Central Asia, but also the kind of complicated issues within the Bolsheviks at that time. But the main kind of crux of what Togan wanted and what many of the other people of Turkestan wanted was a kind of pan-Turkic federation that would be, under Russia still, but basically autonomous, sort of how perhaps we could think about it like it would be a state in the American sense of United States within the new Russian polity. Unfortunately, that did not work out. The Bolsheviks were quite committed to preserving Russian administration over the region and not really handing it over to the various Turkic peoples of former Imperial Russian Turkestan, and this would prove to be an ongoing issue. Togan was part of a movement for independence that was also, militant, and another problem for both the Turkic peoples and, for the Bolsheviks' kind of own agenda was the kind of competing and sometimes contradictory nationality policies. This is by no means exclusively affected the Turkic peoples. This affected all of the kind of constituent nations that were under Russian imperial rule. But essentially, Stalin, Lenin, and Trotsky all had kind of different interpretations and ideas of what to do. And Togan was unsuccessful, unfortunately, and left the Soviet Union in 1923, where he kind of slowly started to become a full-time academic again. He traveled around Iran and Afghanistan, and one of his main discoveries in this period was finding manuscripts of the medieval author Ibn Fadlan, who is probably most well known for writing a travelogue about the Volga Vikings, and that would prove to be a major part of Togan's scholarship. By 1925, he went to Turkey and became a Turkish citizen, where he became professor of history at Istanbul University. And like in the Soviet Union, Togan had an important impact on the politics of the new Republic of Turkey, which was trying to, find its identity. And there are on two subjects he made an impact on Republican Turkish politics. The first was secularism. Togan was not an atheist, but he did support secularism on the basis that theocracy was not a kind of Turkic principle of governance. And he has good basis for this, because Turkic polities tended to separate spiritual authority from the authority of the Sultan. So spiritual and, we could say, secular law were separate, and the latter, the temporal authority, is known by either yasa, that's the Mongol term, or kanun, and this was kind of also the Ottoman understanding of law, to separate the kanun and Sharia, which was a sort of break from earlier Islamic history. If you know about the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, and even other states like the Mamluks. Another point on this, kind of related to secularism, that Togan advocated, was that because of the kind of dominance of European civilization or European states at that time, Islam did have to make certain adaptations, and that he argued this because he said that Muslim nations had become, colonial subjects of Russia, and because of this, the Sharia became more dominant, and in Russian Turkestan, the imams were kind of paid by the Russian government and were sort of kind of like government bureaucrats in a way, or government employees. And Togan said that abandoning the kind of yasa or kanun understanding was a disaster for Turks, in his view. This brought about a lot of reactions within Turkey. And they deeply criticized him. Some of these were early scholars and political figures in the new republic, such as Muallim Cevdet, who lives 1883 to 1935, and Şemseddin Günaltay, who later became Prime Minister of Turkey from 1949 to 1950. And both Cevdet and Günaltay were presidents of the Turkish Historical Society at various times. So, the kind of link between politics and history in early Turkey was quite strong. And they were deeply opposed to Togan's view. But Togan was once again not atheistic, but he was tended to be on the kind of Sufi bent in Islam. His father was part of the Naqshbandi lineage, and his mother was part of the Yesavi Tariqat, or lineage. But Togan was not really fully on board with Sufism, despite that being more in his background. He preferred kind of shamanism, and he did not like a lot of the sheikhs, apparently. His religious ideas were consistent throughout his life. He said that God set up laws and everything works according to these laws. And he was not the kind of believer concerned with issues of Ahmed or Mehmed and these other kinds of issues of which he viewed as small. Rather, he viewed God more as being a kind of creator of natural laws of the universe. Now, despite the opposition to Togan's views, secularism and his kind of approach to Islam was quite popular. There were a number of intellectuals that agreed with him. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was, of course, a proponent of this kind of secularism, and he even met Togan at one point in Ankara for dinner in 1930. And there are several other Turkish intellectuals that supported him, such as sociologist Ziauddin Fahri, and that allowed him to kind of stay within the academic mainstream of Turkey despite the debate. The second area where he had an impact in Turkey was he was a supporter of the use of English as the language of instruction in Turkey. And if you have been to or visited a Turkish university or perhaps attended one, that's the case at several of them today. He said that English had to be the primary academic language, both at Turkish universities and those in Central Asia, and that he advocated for English starting in high school. And he argued that the use of English and adopting aspects of Western culture, that it would allow Muslims to influence global culture. But people like Muallim Cevdet that I just mentioned and others didn't really agree with this. Togan was basing the use of English on primarily India and the use of English by Indian Hindus and Muslims, and those opposed to Togan's ideas were said that the Indians had to adopt English because they were under British colonial rule, and they did not want Turkey to become a kind of English colony, in their view, at least intellectually, and Turkey was its own kind of cultural sphere and space, and it should remain that way. And all this to say, though, despite these kind of debates, he was well regarded in Turkey, and he was, one of the kind of main founding intellectuals in the new Turkey, with among others like Fuat Köprülü, and people like that founded like the Turkish Historical Association, the Association of Turkish Geography, and the other cultural and educational bodies of the new country. In 1927, he was appointed to be a Turkish history chair, but he later resigned this in 1932. He had a disagreement over historiography with Reşit Galip at the first Turkish history conference, and he went to Vienna. It was at the University of Vienna where he completed his PhD based on his research into Ibn Fadlan. And he remained there in Europe for several years. He was a professor at Bonn University from 1935 to 37, and then at Göttingen from 1938 to 1939. In 1939, he was re-invited to come back to Turkey, where he started to teach at Istanbul University again. But he was not completely done with controversies. During the Second World War, in 1945, he was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. This was connected to 1944. There were protests in support of Pan-Turkists that had been detained, and the trial accused him of having been in charge of a organization that was aimed at allying with the Third Reich to grant independence to Turkic people in the Soviet Union. And it seems he was imprisoned for about 2 years, and then a retrial commenced, and all the defendants in this case were released. In 1953, he organized the Institute for Islamic Studies at Istanbul University, and remained there for the rest of his life. And he died in 1970. Togan's bibliography is extensive. The collected works number 337 of primarily articles, but also books. He also published his memoirs, which have been translated into English. I did not examine those for this video, but I may revisit them in a future video. But looking at his bibliography and his academic interests, he had a wide-ranging interest in all kinds of Islamic and Turkic history. Just to give some examples, we have in 1964 he published the earliest translation of the Quran into Turkish. Another focus was on the legacy of Tamerlane and Genghis Khan. He also wrote on issues relating to more current events. For example, in 1959, he published an article on Soviet policy toward Central Asia. And he did more kind of traditional Orientalist work, writing about manuscript collections and various texts. For example, one of his articles published in English is about Rashid al-Din, and published many articles and reviews. So this is by no means the last word on Zeki Velidi Togan, but I mostly wanted to make this to give, just an idea about his life and career, and, the kind of history of Oriental studies. It's something I find to be very fascinating and also important to understand for people that are in the discipline of doing, kind of Middle Eastern or Eastern language and culture. Where is the where our current kind of academic body of knowledge comes from. Unfortunately, it's often forgotten or not read. Not that someone could read all of this older material, but it's good to know what they were thinking about back then in the 19th and early 20th century. So with that, I hope you liked it. I will admit that I did not go over all of the material in Turkish about Zeki Velidi Togan, which is much more extensive. This was just pulling over mostly obituaries and some other articles about him, and I will have the sources for this in the description. If you are a Turkish speaker, you can find much more, and including other videos on YouTube. But again, this was to be intended for an English audience that may not really know much about him. So thank you for listening or watching, and I will speak to you in the next video. Görüşürüz. İyi günler.